Chapter 7 is all about the theories, which can be applied to a variety of helping relationships. In the Files menu on the left-hand side, you will find a theory summary sheet. Print this out, and as you read the chapter on the theories, take notes. This will help you not only in this class on Quiz 7, but also in other classes in psychology or addiction studies. There are 5 broad categories of theories covered in this chapter: psychodynamic models, experiential and relationship-oriented approaches, cognitive behavioral therapies, the postmodern approaches, and the family systems perspective. All behavior has 3 different aspects: thinking, feeling, and acting. As you review each theory, which ones are more thinking-oriented, feeling-oriented, or action-oriented? Theories also may focus on the past, the present, or the future as being the most productive avenue of exploration. Theory is not a rigid set of structures that prescribe step by step what and how you should function as a helper. Consider it more like a roadmap to help you in your counseling techniques. The theory is connected to you and what you think about how people change. The theory will also need to be appropriate to the types of clients that you see, the setting in which you work, and the type of counseling that you will provide. When we work with individuals, we are not consciously thinking about our theory. The theory guides us in the techniques that we choose to employ. At this point in your education, you will need to understand the basics of each theory. The reading organizes the theory in different sections: basic assumptions, key concepts, therapeutic goals, therapeutic relationship, multicultural applications, and main contributions to the helping process. If you continue in your education, most training programs at the graduate level require students to take a semester-long theory course that describes each theory in great detail. Here are the 5 contemporary theoretical orientations that we will be covering in this chapter. Everyone has heard of psychoanalysis, which was where psychology started in the late 1800s with Sigmund Freud in Vienna. If we think about psychoanalysis, we see a client laying on a couch, facing away from the therapist, and talking about whatever comes to mind. It is a long-term therapy. We are talking years and years, with the emphasis on restructuring the personality and working through some deeply ingrained personality problems. Practitioners with a psychoanalytic orientation are interested in the client's early history as a way of understanding how past situations, and we're talking about early childhood, even infancy, contribute to a client's present problems. These techniques are geared towards increasing awareness, acquiring insight, and beginning work through process that will lead to the reorganization of the personality. Many subsequent theorists revolted against Freud's ideas and assumptions of human behavior. Alfred Adler was an initial contributor to this psychoanalytic approach. However, Adler developed a very different approach to therapy. Adler was the forerunner of psychology that focuses on internal determinants of behavior, such as values, beliefs, attitudes, goals, interests, and the individual perception of reality. Alfred Adler was a pioneer of an approach that is holistic, social, goal-oriented, systemic, and humanistic. According to the Adlerian approach, people are primarily social beings, influenced and motivated by societal forces. In contrast to Freud, Adler believed that the conscious, not the unconscious, is the center of the personality. Adlerian approach has a psychoeducational focus. A present and future orientation is brief and time-limited approach. There is significant linkage between the Adlerian approach and many of the present-day theories. Existential therapy has the therapeutic goal of challenging clients to recognize and accept the freedom they have to be the authors of their own lives. However, along with this then comes the responsibility to craft your own life. Themes such as relationships, finding meaning, anxiety, suffering, and death are concerns that transcend the boundaries that separate cultures. The client-therapist relationship is of paramount importance in the existential approach because the quality of the I-thou encounter offers a context for change. Therapy is a collaborative relationship in which both client and therapist are involved in a journey into self-discovery. Person-centered therapy was originally developed by Carl Rogers in the 1940s as a reaction against the psychoanalytic therapy. The person-centered approach emphasizes the client's resources for becoming self-aware and for resolving blocks to personal growth. In other words, it is the client who is able to change without a high degree of structure and direction from the therapist. Unconditional love or acceptance is a term that we often hear nowadays, and this originated with Carl Rogers. This is a positive, optimistic view of human behavior and relationships. The key tenets of any counseling relationship are these three: genuineness, warmth, and accurate empathy. In addition to these, the counselor uses active listening as the most therapeutic technique. The Gestalt therapist functions as a guide and a catalyst, presents experiments to the clients, and shares observations. The basic work of therapy is done by the client. Client identify their own unfinished business from the past that is interfering with their present functioning by re-experiencing past situations as though they were happening in the present moment. One of the most famous well-known techniques in Gestalt therapy is the empty chair technique. This technique is very powerful because it brings a past relationship into the session today. This orientation emphasizes doing and direct experiences as opposed to merely talking about the problems in a detached way. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has gained a lot of popularity and is increasingly being used as the basis for practice with a wide variety of client populations, with a multitude of problems and in many different settings. Behavioral approaches assume that people are basically shaped by both learning and the socio-cultural environment. Behavior therapy emphasizes current behavior as opposed to historical antecedents. Behavior therapy comes out of research, or the experimental model. As such, the client determines what behavior will be changed, but the therapist typically determines how this behavior can best be modified. There is an emphasis on measuring a specific behavior before and after an intervention to determine if, and to what degree, behavior change as a result of the procedure or the intervention. Some well-known behavior theory techniques are relaxation methods, systematic desensitization, in vivo desensitization, flooding, assertion training, and self-management programs. This theory is more technique-centered, and these techniques can be applied to a wide variety of culturally diverse client populations. Rational emotive behavioral therapy, REBT, was developed by Albert Ellis. The cognitive behavioral approaches are based on the assumption that a reorganization of one's self-statements, i.e. thinking, will result in a corresponding reorganization of one's behavior. Clients are taught that the events of life themselves do not disturb us. Rather, our interpretation of the events is what is critical. For example, let's say that someone close to you dies. The death itself is a significant and very stressful event, but your behavior is largely influenced by your thinking process. If you are thinking, I can't handle this, I can't go on without the person, then this leads to certain types of behaviors, such as depression and helplessness. Whereas, what if your thinking process was something like, this is really hard and really sad, but I can get through this one day at a time with help from my family and friends. These self-statements may lead to a different set of behaviors in coping with the grief and loss at a loved one's death. REBT therapy is a process of re-education, and the therapist functions largely as a teacher in active and directive ways. REBT is a comprehensive, integrative approach to therapy aimed at changing disturbances in thinking, feeling, and behaving. Aaron Beck is a pioneer of cognitive therapy who made important contributions in understanding and treating disorders such as depression, phobias, and anxiety. Cognitive therapy, CT, consists of changing dysfunctional emotions and behaviors by modifying inaccurate and dysfunctional thinking. CT has received a great deal of attention by clinical researchers. As an undergraduate student, I studied at the University of Oregon in psychology, and cognitive therapy was being studied there by the clinical research team for the treatment of depression. Counselors ask the client to weigh the evidence in support of their faulty beliefs. An example of this would be someone who is thinking, "I always screw everything up. I'm such a loser." The CT therapist would ask the client to tell them about all the things that they have screwed up in their life. Once this list is firmly established, then the CT therapist says something like, "Is there anything in your life that is currently not screwed up?" The CT therapist pushes the client to find something that is not screwed up and then says, "Aha! So everything is not screwed up. You have done some things really well in your life, like graduating high school." The CT therapist then says, "So you have not screwed everything up. In fact, some things you can do quite nicely. What if we change that negative self-talk and instead described your behavior in a more realistic manner?" Homework is often used in cognitive therapy. In the example above, the therapist would say, "This week, I want you to make a list of all the things that you do at least halfway decent. Given the list of positive things you have done, what might be some more realistic self-statements? Can you write them down during the week?" Homework is used to keep working on the issues that were brought up in the counseling sessions. This approach emphasizes a collaborative effort of both the therapist and the client in challenging the dysfunctional thinking. Reality therapy was founded and developed by William Glasser in the 1960s. The major assumption of reality therapy is that people are responsible for their own behaviors, what they do. We all have internal human needs, which determine our behaviors. There's the need for survival, need for love and belonging, need for power, need for freedom, and the need for fun. Counselors ask the clients to evaluate the effectiveness of what they are choosing to do, to determine if better choices may be possible. How's that working for you? WDEP was developed by Webolding in 2000 and revised in 2011. Reality therapy is a short-term approach consisting of simple, clear concepts that are easily understood. It is a positive and action-oriented approach. Clients, even those who are mandated, are asked to focus on what they are able and willing to do in the present to change their behaviors. The Solution-Focused Brief Therapy, SFBT, therapist does not act as an expert. Rather, the client is the expert and the therapist is the consultant. This therapy assumes that people are healthy, competent, resourceful, and possess the ability to construct solutions and alternative stories that can enhance their lives. Here are some of the techniques found in solution-focused brief therapy. Pre-therapy change. At the very first session, the therapist asks the client, "Since you called for your appointment, what have you done to make a difference in your problem?" Asking the pre-therapy question tends to encourage the client to rely less on the therapist and more on their own resources to reach their goals. Exception questions directs the client to think about the times when the problem did not exist in their lives in order to discover resources, engage strengths, and create possible solutions now. The miracle question is something like, what will be some of the things you will notice when life is better? Notice the future-oriented approach in the miracle question. Scaling questions go something like this. On a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to do your homework this week? In narrative therapy, the person is not the problem, but the problem is the problem. Problems are ordinary difficulties and challenges in life. In narrative therapy, the therapist collaborates with the client and develops and creates new stories about the problems. In the family systems approaches, a family is more than the sum of its parts. The family is a functioning unit unto itself. You can focus and counsel all of the individuals in a family, but the family functioning may still rely on old patterns and habits. This is known as maintaining the homeostasis or the balance that's inherent in the family. However, on the other hand, by changing one of the members of a family, this change will also influence the other members too. Family therapists function as models, teachers, and coaches. Although the skills of the therapist are crucial, the therapist's ability to establish rapport and create a working relationship with each of the family members is what really counts. One of the main contributions to family systems approaches is that neither the family nor the individual is blamed for a particular dysfunction. There is no single theory that is comprehensive enough to account for all the complexities of human behavior when the full range of client types and their specific problems are taken into consideration. Each theory represents a different vantage point from which to look at human behavior, but no one theory has the total truth. In order to develop an integrative approach, you need to be thoroughly grounded in a number of theories, be open to the idea that these theories can be unified in some ways, and be willing to continually test your hypotheses to determine how well they are working. Developing your personalized approach that guides your practice is a lifelong endeavor that is only refined with your experience. Write about the different theories as you understand them in the discussion forum, and then take the quiz on Chapter 7.